this is Jonas Dupuis. Welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Wire podcast. Today, I'll be speaking with co-host John. Hey, John.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. What have you been up to lately?
Oh, it's been a wild run here the last couple of weeks. We've had some really early colder winter weather. I don't know. I don't think last year it froze until after Thanksgiving, and we've already had 3 or 4 freezes.
Wow.
Been really good ones because it's only been 28, 29, which is kind of nice. Get the trees, get their antifreeze system set up, and nothing. I think last year we had a 23 was our first one in mid-December or something crazy like that. It was like kind of freak out, but so it's kind of nice to get that. But yeah, this is always a weird time. Fall's a weird time around the yard. I was talking to someone that's not, they don't know anything about bonsai. They were asking me what I was doing and said, well, it's kind of embarrassing because I spent my entire day snipping leaves off of trees. Like it's such a weird, such a weird thing, It's like, how many people think about like getting a pair of scissors and cutting 10,000 leaves off of trees? But that's what I've been doing pretty much the last couple of days, is just keeping the yard looking nice by cutting leaves off and then doing fall pruning on deciduous. So
is everything pretty much, has it all turned color by now?
Yeah, it's all turned color, and probably half to 2/3 of the deciduous have dropped leaves or been taken off.
What do the chojubai look like this time of year?
They have mostly lost. They kind of start losing late summer, early fall. They start kind of yellowing and shedding, and then like the older ones right now are almost all bare, and the younger ones are pretty full still. But they kind of like lose through the winter here, and they'll eventually like drop everything by mid to late November. But we still have a week or two on some of them. But then they flower like crazy here. I don't know what yours do, but
they flower like crazy.
Yeah. I mean, they kind of flower all the time, but here they're in full flower, which is kind of fun. If we keep the slugs off of them.
Oh yeah. Slugs love
the flowers. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. They eat the buds. They eat holes in the buds. It's wacko.
Yeah. So if we can keep the slugs off of them, they look pretty great because they got some nice red flowers. And
yeah, it's the same thing in my garden, that the older trees don't look as good, but the younger trees are just putting on new growth and looking great.
Yeah. A lot of extension, and it looks good.
Neat. Have you been out of town lately, or have you just been chained to the scissor pulling off leaves?
Mostly here. I did take a day off to go visit some friends in Eastern Washington, and then Michael and I actually got away for a collecting trip. We hadn't gone up and collected. He hadn't been up in a while, and there's a place in Washington he likes to go to in one of the flows off of Mount Adams. Huh. And so we went up there to the flows. It was pouring rain, which is a little unfortunate, but we suited up and we're mostly prepared, I think. Drove up there. I think it took us 4 backtrackings to actually find the place. We had to like drive into where we had cell range, and we took a wrong turn 3 times, but we ultimately got there, and it was a bunch of fun. And it was actually election day, which is kind of nice. Like he wanted to go out and get out of town for election day because we would just be doom scrolling, so that was he kept apologizing for getting lost. I'm like, look, I'd rather be here than sitting in front of my computer worrying about the world, Even if I'm just wandering lost in the woods, I'd rather be here. So yeah, we got up there. We were mostly looking for vine maples, and we traipsed around in 3 or 4 different places. I don't know if you've ever been into any lava flow.
I haven't.
Areas, but it's kind of bizarre. The one up here in Washington is pretty old, so there's trees growing in it pretty well. Like there's a good amount of soil. It's mostly sand kind of soil, but we've got a couple of lava flows that are in central Oregon they just look like the surface of the moon. There's nothing growing in them, not even ground covers really. But this one's old enough that's got some pretty good sized trees in it, and everything's stunted because of it's so weird, such big lava rocks, it just doesn't have the right soil and nutrient, whatever. But it's super difficult to walk around in because it's real jagged rocks, real craggy, real sharp. And so you're always tripping and cutting your hand because you fall and, that kind of stuff. Oh. And then there's these big crevasses where I think when it was forming, it was like there were lava flows, and then it hardened, and then it left a tunnel, and then the tunnel collapsed.
Huh.
And so there's these big crevasses. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like hunting for trees on the surface of the moon. And it's a little bit hit and miss what you can find up there. There were a lot of subalpines up there, firs and true firs. And we were mostly looking for maples because they grow pretty gnarly up there, our native vine maple. So we looked all day, and it was, I go mushroom hunting a lot, and I tell people it's, I don't call it mushroom collecting. I call it mushroom hunting because you just never know what you're going to find. You can't go up there expecting anything.
Yeah, and just because there was something last year doesn't mean it'll be there this year.
Exactly. And so we went out there. We probably stopped at 3 or 4 different places, and we were at lower elevation and didn't find anything. We went higher elevation, and all of a sudden there were no vine maples. So we went a little lower in elevation. And I think Michael said something like, I've got 5 more minutes in me. It was like 2:30. And we were both soaked to the bone by then. We both brought rain jackets and total rain suits, but it didn't help. We were totally drenched. And so, okay, 5 more minutes. Okay, I'm going to go over this ridge. You go over that ridge. And then the 5 minutes was up, and I start calling for him. I can't find him. I get up on the top of the ridge, and I'm yelling. And finally, he ducks his head over a couple of ridges over, and he said, I found something. So, of course,
gosh.
Run over there, and it was probably 2:45 at that point, and it was a beautiful vine maple that it probably had 6 or 7 previous lives where it just some old burl, and then you could see a dead trunk, and then another trunk had grown. But it was super nice, but it was kind of in this really tight rock formation. So we start digging and chipping and clawing and prying, and I don't know, at some point right at the end, the crevasses were kind of in a parallel, and it was like parallel lines that you could put your foot down into. So I had both of my feet down in this crack up to my knees that I could barely get my feet down into, and then they wedged in there, So I've got one foot in front of the other in this crack, and I'm prying on the tree, and the pry bar slips out, and I fall backwards down the hill. But I'm kind of wedged in this crack at the same time,
Oh gosh.
So I land upside down because I was on a cliff, and I land upside down with my feet are the only thing holding me in, but I landed on a really sharp lava rock right in my tailbone. And I think I broke my tailbone.
Oh, ouch.
But then when it all happened, 2 big rocks fell down the crevasse and on my feet. So I'm being wedged in.
So you do get insult on top of injury.
Right, exactly. I'm totally wedged in. The only thing holding me from falling off this face of this cliff is that my feet are in here, and then 2 big rocks are on there. And then I've got this, thing digging into the back of my. So Michael's trying to scramble to get me out of there, trying to pull me up, but he can't pull me up because my feet are wedged in. So then he's trying to get my feet. I'm trying to help myself, but I can't really move because.
Oh gosh.
So anyway, I took a few minutes to break, and then we ultimately got it out of there. It took us 3 hours, which I think Michael said that's the longest he's ever worked on a tree, but
really?
It took us 3 hours to dig that thing out of there. But
do vine maples do pretty well when they come out?
Yeah, it had a ton of it had probably 3 or 4 3-inch big roots, big taproot type roots that we had to sever. But it also just had a ton of fine fiber roots. So we were able to save it. And he's had really good success. They tend to root back pretty easily. So I think that was the one reason he was willing to collect it, is it was obvious that it had a lot of really fine rooting right there on the surface, just in the leaf litter. And sometimes it's hard to tell, is that rooting, is that ferns and stuff growing around? But this was growing kind of in a little pocket all by itself. So it was obvious that was all.
Well, now as long as your body can repair as well as the roots can repair, then
I know. Yeah. So I got a bum knee, and then kind of walking around all I wanted to do the next day was sit, but I can't sit because I got this broken tailbone, or at least bruised tailbone. I don't know.
Yeah. Tailbone injuries are very uncomfortable. That is no fun. Right. Well, yeah, gee, glad you got out of town. I guess you'll be. Do you do any more collecting later in the season, or is that about it?
Yeah, we're going to try to go back up one more time and just kind of look around. There's this lava flow is pretty big, so it's got it's got some different elevation areas. There's some hemlock in an area I'd like to go look at, and so we'll probably try to get up again. It's also high mushroom season in that area too, so we were digging around for mushrooms as well, just kind of trying to get
Which
our
mushrooms this time of year?
We get chanterelles is the easiest one for everybody, but then up there we found matsutake.
Really?
Which are the really popular one in Japan. For a while they were being exported to Japan for a lot of money. I'm not sure what, but they're really fun. I don't know if you've ever had them, but
I love them. Yeah.
They have the books say they have a smell between a red hot and a dirty sock. So you got this crazy smell. So they're really easy to tell what they are because they kind of look like other just nondescript white mushrooms, but it's undeniable when you smell it what it is. So
there's a fun dish we make with it where we actually put it in the rice cooker with the rice, and so you have matsutake rice, and it's just this super rich, umami filled, wonderful taste. It's really good stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy. It really is red hot cinnamon something going on in there. They're fun mushrooms.
Well, I'm gonna have to make sure we get some mushrooms next time I come to visit. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. We have a ton of chanterelles, so that's the one everybody can recognize, and they grow really easily in the Doug fir forest. So
yeah, I remember flying through Portland in spring, and there was a flower market in the Portland airport just filled with all these fresh mushrooms, and I were it an option, I would have bought a lot of mushrooms that day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, yum. Well, back to the garden. So when you're pulling these leaves, do you ever strip the leaves, or do you literally just cut leaf after leaf after leaf all day long?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the species. We had this crazy cold snap, and then we went this rainstorm that Michael and I were collecting in, and then the next day I was not feeling good, so I just sat around. And it's kind of like they kind of all turned at the same time, and then they started falling. So by the time I got out there, I was literally just grabbing tufts of leaves off of the trees.
Oh, okay.
Because they had already like gone from, it's late summer. Oh, now it's winter. So we had like 1.5 days of really beautiful red leaves in the yard, and then they're all falling on the ground anyway. So generally, we'll like strip the leaves backwards on some trees, and we can pull forwards on other trees. And then some things we have to cut. So it just kind of depends. But for the most part, everything was just falling off. The ginkgos were just falling off in my hand, and the maples were just falling off in my hand. And the tridents I did have to strip, but we could pull those off pretty easily pulling forward.
Yeah, those you can strip about as easy as anything, and the buds tend to be tough. Shojubai can be rough because the leaves aren't always turned, and there's thorns in there. So
yeah, exactly.
Do you always go out of your way to fully defoliate the shojubai?
When we're pruning, especially when we're doing big prunes, we do fully defoliate, and then so just so we can get in there and see stuff. But then we do a lot of our pruning in the winter, so they've lost leaves, which is nice. But yeah, especially if we've got a tree that's about ready to go into a bonsai pot, we've been growing it out for a few years, it's about ready to go in, we'll fully defoliate it just to make sure there's nothing in there structure wise that we need to correct before it gets its final pot and go in.
Oh, that's cool. That makes all kinds of sense.
And it's the same with some of the other trees. We'll try to fully defoliate before we make big cuts on stuff, just to make sure we got everything. Yeah, but then like the Corylopsis, we got to be careful with them because they don't pull off very easily. You can strip them backwards sometimes, but
those I would want to cut.
And the Stewartia, same thing. It's
definitely cut the Stewartia. Yeah.
So we got to be careful with some things, but other things. But yeah, like I said, most of them are just falling off already. So I didn't catch them early enough this year to actually be cutting. So I was just mostly picking up off the ground and grabbing big handfuls,
Do you, so I assume you stopped fertilizing the deciduous this time of year. Do you continue fertilizing the conifers?
Yeah, we'll do, the deciduous are probably pretty done. We did do a kind of a late, maybe a month ago, we did a pellet. We usually use liquids here because it's so dry in the summer. So the pellets don't really like break down the same, but we've been trying to get a little more into late fall and early spring. We did a slow release pellet maybe a month ago. And so that'll push us through. I think Thanksgiving is about when we stop. everything, but kind of gets cold enough where nothing's metabolizing. But yeah, we did a big one about a month ago, which will push us through to Thanksgiving or so.
And I assume you can leave all your trees on the benches for now until you get some crazy cold, or how
yeah, we pulled down a few of the littlest ones. It was 20. I think we got down to 26, and it's actually the 2 days, Sunday night, tomorrow night, we're getting down to 26 again. So we'll pull the little ones down. We don't have a whole lot of little trees, but anything in the shoheen, small chuheen size, we'll pull down, get put away. But we'll just pull them down onto the rocks. I don't think we'll put anything in the greenhouse until, it'll be, I think, sometime after Thanksgiving, before the 1st of December is when we pull all the trees back from the Japanese garden that we have there on show, and then we'll pull stuff into the greenhouse that's delicate.
Oh, so they just have no trees. You take all the trees over to the garden then in winter from?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think Michael's trying to get them to get a collection that they can manage, but it's just too much for their staff to manage through the winter, in the event of a big storm or something. So we pull them off. We pull them off after Thanksgiving, and then they go back early spring.
Yeah, it's kind of a big ask to have someone take care of trees at that level all winter long. You want to make sure you want to be pretty confident they're on top of their stuff.
Yeah, it's just, and I don't know, they're kind of high in the West Hills here. I don't know what the elevation change is, but it's probably only 500 or 600 feet. But it's amazing because they have their own weather system up there. It'll be sleeting rain up there, and Michael will come to the garden here and it's sunny. It's so weird. They just have, so it's the weather's a little less predictable up there. So they come home. So we're bringing them home next week, and then they'll live here, and then we'll clean out the greenhouses and get stuff packed in there pretty soon for the winter.
Oh, cool. And so that means that probably the next order of business is a lot of pruning and wiring.
Yeah, I've been trying to get through the maples since they're just now losing the leaves. We have 10 or 12 days here to get all of them cut back. So I'm almost done with them. And then it's kind of a wire conifers, wire and shaped conifers, and prune them back. I've got a couple of azos that I've got to get through. And then kind of balancing that with, we have these chochabai we've got to cut off, but we, both the conifers and the chochabai, it's kind of, we just try to get them done sometime in the winter. So we kind of have 2 or 3 months here where we can kind of go back and forth. And it's a nice time of year because the work is, there's certain windows, but the windows are pretty big. There's certain times like this, like the maple cutting, we have a really small window to cut those, before they start bleeding again. But the winter tends to be a pretty big, long open window where we can get stuff done. So it's kind of nice because we have a huge list of work we have to get done, but it's not like, we need this done by the 1st of June or anything. It's not like decantling black pines or something where we have to be done by this date or we have to be done,
Yeah, it's great when you have that flexibility. And it's nice that your winter's not any colder than it is, because it gives you just enough so the trees get dormancy and they can still be worked on the whole time.
Right, exactly. Yep. Yeah, we don't have a whole lot of risk of, if we do big bins on conifers, we'll greenhouse it. But for the most part, I think we just leave stuff back out on the gravel, and it does fine. So,
even wired.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. And do you do much wiring of deciduous? I know in general, the garden, you don't see a lot of wire on deciduous, but will you be putting any wire on deciduous at this time of year?
Not a whole lot. We do put wire on in the spring mostly here.
So it's mostly the cutback now.
Most of the cutback, and then we will wire a little bit. There was a huge sprout on the coralopsis exactly where we needed it.
Ooh.
And so we'll wire that out. But mostly what we are doing is wiring new growth in the spring after that big flush of first growth. We'll decide if we want to wire it or cut it, and then we'll do the wiring then. But for the most part, we don't wire deciduous too much in the winter.
I like that idea about that you get a shoot right where you want it. That's such a rare thing in bonsai.
I know. Yeah, it's this one tree has this hole, and it's we're trying to grow the whole thing left, but it wants to grow right, and so we've been cutting back and whatever. And now we have a shoot, so now we're going to finally get to wire that thing out and get it where we want it. So that's kind of nice.
Well, one thing I'm curious about is, since you're How many months now into your apprenticeship are you?
Oh boy. I don't
Year and a
know.
half or something?
Yeah, something like that. Yep.
And so I'm curious, you'll be doing a lot of wiring this summer, kind of, or winter. Um, like, what are you working on in terms of your own relationship with styling trees? Like, are
Mm.
there some technical things or stylistic things that have been on your mind, or that you really want to practice, or just see what you can get out of the trees this winter?
Yeah, I think one thing I'm really working on, and I think one thing I'm working on really is just the idea of like doing the job correctly, but also balancing time and energy. And I think that that's something probably that professionals have to deal with a lot more than hobbyists have to deal with, where it's like it's not that professionals are cutting corners, but seeing as professionals have so much more work to do and so there's this line of like, okay, how finely do we wire this azo? Do we put 22 gauge
Oh
copper
gosh.
on that thing, or do you wire it, do you set yourself up for the next session to be right, and I think that that's kind of that's the balance I'm trying to strike of like, okay, the first tree that I wired when I was here was 2 years ago, and it was a hemlock, and I came once a week and wired this hemlock, and it was a pretty big forest. I mean, it's 5.5 foot tall, it's a big tree, but I think it took me 2.5 months of weekends to wire that thing. It's like, the poor thing, it probably is not going to make it because half of it was pruned 2.5 months ago and wired out. And so it's like, it just took so long. And every time I came, it was like, I'm committed to getting this thing done, but man, I'm ready to move on to some other tree, and we're just ready to, I'm ready to move on to another species.
Well,
But it's
so
kind of like, and then the last tree that I wired was like 3 hours, and I had it wired out, and it wasn't a big wire job. It had been wired before a couple of times, but it just struck me like, okay, there's this, and I even hate to say it, like this good enough, because I don't want to tell people like, oh, we just do it good enough, but it's kind of that feeling of like, we're setting the tree up for the next phase. We don't have to be finished today. We just want to improve the tree every time we touch it, and it's one tree of 9 that we have to get through, and so we're doing the job right. We're doing it correctly, but we're not obsessing over all of the little details. Does that
what
make sense?
criteria? Yeah, it does. What criteria come to mind that help you decide whether or not you're going to go from 16 to 18 or 18 to 20 on some of these things?
Well, a lot of it has to do with species. Obviously, we don't put any 20 on ponderosa, that kind of thing. So we just wire that out. And some of the limber pines, some of the pines especially, we don't wire out super finely. But then like the azos and the hemlocks, they all really require that smaller wire. But I think one thing that I've learned, like in the time that I've been here, because I had only done bonsai for a year before I met Michael and Andrew, so I don't have very many moons under my
Mhm.
belt, just in general, So there's these like some things that I'm learning in the yard here, which is nice because I think people would learn them eventually, but I'm having to learn them a lot faster. And one of those is like, okay, I look at this hemlock branch or this, hemlock it doesn't backbud very well, or juniper. Let's call it juniper because I think everybody works with juniper. Let's look at this juniper branch. Well, when I first wired this tree, I wired it out finely to 20, and I set every little branchlet and every little tertiary. And then this last time I learned, okay, actually what happens then if the tree is already dense and I've wired everything out is that by the next growing season, it's become way too dense.
Yeah.
And then I watched both Michael and Andrew work, and they're selectively cutting off the things that don't already look good. If it's pointing down, if it's drooping, if the foliage is not nice. So they initially take off, 50%. Of course, it's, this tree is dense and well growing, but they're taking off, some X percentage, and then they're wiring out just the things that are a problem after that. Instead of like, my first concept was like, I have to save everything, all of these little,
Mm.
crotchy branches and droopy branches. And And so I think that's where some of the efficiency has come. Like, okay, so if I have to cut out something anyway because the tree will be too dense, and so if I make my choices wisely, then that's a lot less to wire. If I'm cutting off the problematic branches before I even pull the wire out, then it makes the wiring so much easier. Or if I'm cutting out all the density, it's just little things that I learn instead of like randomly cutting things off and then trying to struggle through figuring out how to wire everything. It's like, oh, okay, if I'm selective and systematic about what gets cut off, then it's a lot less to wire.
And I think that's one of the hardest things to teach. I mean, you really put your finger on it when you mentioned the things that are already weak, that are already growing down, that are already crowded. Because on paper, that's really the only criteria we have for making those cuts. But it's that knowing where the balance point is of how much foliage you need to suggest the right shape of a pad, for instance, so you can feel free to cut the rest and then manipulate whatever you have remaining.
Yeah. And then also just like looking at the tree as a whole and saying, is the tree balanced? Does the crown have a weakness? So maybe I've got to be more careful with the crown. I don't cut anything off of there, but I'm taking off some of the lower branches, thinning, just so things by the end of the work, they're either matched or it's even weaker on the bottom so that the top can, it's just like making these decisions about what the tree needs. Because every tree you approach, hardly are, do we have like the perfect setup where we're just like rubber stamping. We're constantly having to make these decisions about, what does this tree specifically need? What's its species? What history does it have? How did it respond last time to what we did to it? That kind of thing.
And that's even harder to convey to people, is how to kind of read the tree or to keep that in mind. Because you're right, trees naturally are going to put coarse, vigorous growth up near the top where you want it to be slow and fine, and they're going to have a bunch of weak branches below. And so even if you do everything perfectly, the tree's still trying to invest in the exact opposite branches that we're hoping for.
Yeah, and the chochobai do the opposite. If you let them go for a couple of years, they bifurcate and then they abandon that old shoot and they send out another one. And so it's like, knowing your difference between your bushes and your trees, and then also just even, eventually the trees will stop doing we can like the chochobai will stop sending out sprouts at the bottom.
How do you get that to happen?
Well, I don't know. So it's funny because some of the older ones just don't do it anymore, which I'm really glad for. And I don't know if it's like they're finally to the ramification they need to be. They finally slowed down enough where they're not sending up a bunch of shoots. But it's just funny. It must be the different root systems or something, or species. I don't know what it is. But some of the younger chochobai just send up hundreds of these shoots, and then some don't. So
and it's constant all year long.
Oh, all year long. Yeah, it doesn't matter. The chochobai are funny. I really like them. They're kind of quirky little things. They don't really follow a whole lot of rules. They they flower. They'll lose their leaves in the summer. First time I saw them, I'm like, oh my God, Michael, I think I'm killing them. All the chochobai are losing their leaves. It's like, oh no, they'll be back. A couple days later, these little buds are growing and the leaves are going. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's a weird one. Middle of August, shedding all of its leaves. Like, what in the world? Who are you?
And so then that short amount of time later that they get their leaves for, then they lose them again right now. It's so far.
Exactly. Yeah, they get a month of new growth and then they're dropping them now and they're flowering now. It's just like, you're such a weird plant.
Yeah, but I noticed that they're more prone to be weak on the top and send out more and more of those lower shoots. And I find it's almost you can't go a full 4 weeks between cutting the lower shoots out of the ground because you'll be sunk if you wait that long.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We watch, every day I'm walking around cutting out those, and especially on the older stuff, we pull off fruits and flowers, especially on the oldest ones.
Yeah.
And then, watching for shoots. So that's a big kind of daily task, walking around, making sure the Irish knot moss is not growing everywhere and the flowers aren't turning into fruits on the chochobai.
When you're working on wiring more mature trees, I'm curious, do you think about your own work from a less technical perspective or maybe more artistic perspective where you're trying to achieve certain effects in trees? Or do you ever think about it like that? Because you described perfectly kind of the basics of styling. Well, I'm going to cut these things, I'm going to wire those. And it's like, well, how are you wiring them? Or maybe totally other way to look at it would be, is there anything you see in the work of others that you would either like to emulate or incorporate in your own work? Or do you see a gap between where your wiring is and maybe where you'd want it to be?
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I think the thing that, and Michael and I have talked about some like goals that we want to get through before, because I'm done in July, 1st of July, I'm done. So this will be my last potting season, my last winter wiring season, and then I've got some spring and summer work. But I want to like fill in some of the gaps that I have. We'll probably get into this later, but Michael and I initially settled on a 2-year program, which is much less than he would personally like out of an apprentice. But since my goals are different, and I don't necessarily want to refine trees, I just want to learn I want to learn from him how to discern a refined tree, or how to get to that point, even if I can't necessarily get there myself. I want to see what the Michaels of the world look for when they're looking for a product that they can grow into that. You know what I'm saying?
Have you come up with an answer to that?
Well, not really. And that's where I've got to that's where some of the gaps in my knowledge are at this point. And that maybe brings us to the wiring thing, is like when we're working with Yamadori, and I kind of mentioned this already, like we typically try to focus on like, what do I need to do now to set the tree up to be successful in the future? And so, and that comes back to like, we may not be wiring everything out to a 20 gauge right at the beginning, or we may not be cutting off everything that absolutely needs to get cut off because the tree might need that to regrow the root system, or whatever the situation is. We may not be, it's a much longer game than I think I was aware of. I mean, of course, you talk about, okay, this tree is 50 years old, or this tree was 100 years old, or whatever, and it's been in the pot, so obviously we know that it's a long game. But I think the things that I'm kind of like coming around to is like, okay, I don't need to finish the tree today. I just need to set the tree up to be ready for next spring. And then in next spring, I set the tree up to be ready for fall. And in the fall, and so not only does the tree take a long time to get to where it wants to be, but our process of doing it is over a long amount of time, and that, I don't think that really like sunk in until I was here for a year. It's like, oh, okay. Like, and even things like, okay, we have these trees to do. And if the window closes in the winter on styling this tree, like we just have to cut our losses and we style it next year, or we change our goals a little bit or whatever. Like it's just such a fluid process. It's much less rigid than I assumed it would be. And obviously we would have liked to do that work, but if something comes up, it's different than, okay, if we don't cut a black pine's candles off, then we've lost 5 years. Like that's a definite, we have to do that work. But then there's other stuff that's like, okay, it's unfortunate that we didn't get to that. Or we get in there, we defoliate, we see that something can't get done because, okay, we lost this branch. So maybe we need to put it in a box and we need to buy a few years. Like we can sort of punt that down the road a little bit, and that's okay. Like that's just part of the development of the tree, Mm-hmm. And so not only thinking of it as like, oh, okay, this is a long-term process, but like this is a lot of little iterations over a long term, and that, I think that's kind of the thing I need to like really sink in with. And so I feel like the wiring is that way. Like, okay, I don't have to wire the tree out all the way. I just wire it out so that it's set up to be ready to go when I have twice the ramification, or when I have the kind of branching I need, or whatever,
Which is such an abstract idea, because when you're working with young things, you're typically only going to be keeping a very small amount of the branch that you're wiring.
Exactly. Well, and even when we're wiring out, like I think Michael ran into this a lot as an apprentice himself, and over the years, like you'll sometimes wire out a Yamadori or wire out a tree, and as you're shaping it, you realize you don't want this whole branch, so there goes a whole branch of wired work. And it's painful, because that was half an hour or an hour of wiring that you did, and it's all just got cut off. But there's also like, there's just this sense of like, it's a dynamic process, it's not a static process. It's not something that just like can get done. And I think as a hobbyist, I was, just a hobbyist for a year, but as a hobbyist, I just felt a need to like get the tree done. Like,
Hmm.
you know, I wanted a nice tree. And I think I think a lot of people that I've bumped into have talked about, you know, it's probably a good idea to have a good number of trees. I mean, we talked about this on the podcast already, but it's a good idea to have a good number of trees and to have like different ages of trees, so just so you don't like work a tree to death, you know, like, oh, now I'm going to repot it and then I'm going to wire it and then I'm going to cut it all. It's like, no, you gotta spread that out a little bit, you know, work on different trees and work on different stuff. So it's kind of a different process to, like, you know, the 500 trees we have in our yard are all on the track to finished, and they're all going at a different rate, and they're all at a different pace in that process. And so it's kind of like juggling all of that, like the development goals of these 500 trees or whatever, of figuring out what to be done and where, you know, what kind of work needs to be done in each season. And that's, I suppose, if you wanted to wrap up an apprenticeship in America, that was probably it. It was like, I just trying to figure out, learn myself, and then also like try to keep these trees on their track, you know?
Have you ever been shopping with Michael for young material?
A little bit. We've gone to Randy Knight's, to look at his Yamadori material. He and I, a year ago, actually, we went up to Anton's place, and that was an amazing trip. Went up there and shopped with him, but no, not a whole lot of young material, mostly just Yamadori material.
It's hard when you don't get that hands-on experience figuring out how to evaluate those younger things, so you can make your mental notes about, don't do this.
Right. I mean, Michael has mostly developed his own young stock here, either by cuttings or air layers, and so we have a good amount of that in the yard. And so I feel like I've gotten that a little bit of, like, being able to look at this. You know, we have a dozen air layered maples, Japanese maples. And he says, you know, we can talk through, like, okay, here's what I did wrong with this one. Here's what I wish I would have done, you know, and so we can kind of evaluate those and sort of like rank those in a way. And so that's a little bit similar, but yeah, it'd be nice to go to a large bonsai nursery. I mean, unfortunately, that's just not something we have here. We've got Bonsai Northwest in Seattle, but that's really, we need to come to California, I think.
Well, I don't know what you mean by California. We just don't have enough growers anywhere, as far as I know.
Yeah, I guess we've been out to Telperion together before, also before the tragic fire out there. So we got to look at some stuff there. But yeah, just it's tough. It's tough to. Luckily, we have a good spread of ages here in the yard to be able to kind of do some internal evaluation.
Are there some things you've noticed when you, whether with Michael or on your own, go to these nurseries, are there some things that you know you definitely do want to do or do not want to do, either to emulate some successes or avoid some mistakes in growing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key that I really set out wanting to work with Michael on was just really like being able to put myself into his position and really seeing through his eyes. Like, I think that one of the deficiencies in the market is that so growing and bonsai in general is like a good part of horticulture, and then there's a good part of artistic, right? And it's kind of this odd mix of these two, you know, one's kind of a craft and one's kind of an art. I don't like to spread those out in a hierarchy, but in a horizontal, you know, we've got kind of two extremes. In one sense, you got to figure out how to keep the thing alive and thriving. And in the other sense, you've got to figure out how to make it artistic. And I think that part of the issue is that that there's sort of two camps. There's the horticulture camp of people that like are really good at that, and then there's the artistry camp. People are good at that, but I think that there's a sort of a lack of crossover between those two, like people that know how to deal with the plant, keep it alive, make it thrive, but then set it up to be ready to be a pre-bonsai, you know?
And then on top of that, we've got such weird competing continuums of, I remember 30 years ago when I started, people would say, oh, well, bonsai takes a long time, so it doesn't really matter what I do now because it won't be a real tree for another 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
Whereas now we're so short-term focused. It's like, doesn't matter what the stage of development or whether or not I collected it 10 minutes ago. Let's just wire everything and we'll be done. Then we have a bonsai.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I think of the people I've like, the stuff I've seen, not only in person, but online, the other growers, I see a lot of material that's just, it may never get there. It's like, there's kind of a perception about what, like Trident maples. Everybody loves growing Trident maples big. And so there's a lot of big trunks out there, but I just don't feel like they're grown in a way that they'll ever be anything, and maybe they'll be something, but they're not going to be, they're like, it's like the girth and the size was grown at the expense of style or of something that's going to get set up. So back to that, but back to what I've said a couple of times, like, what does it take to set the tree up for its next stage? And, what does that take? And I'm still trying to figure all that stuff out myself, but like, how do I either get a root base, or how do I get a trunk, or how do I get branching? And, and one way to do it is, some people have done this, and people in the club here, where you grow a tree extremely slowly in a pot over a very long time, and you develop it. And there's some beautiful trees out there that are done that way. And then on the other hand, you've got people that put the tree in the ground and grow it out quickly, and then try to fix some of the inevitable problems that come with growing the tree in the ground. And so just kind of like two extreme ideas of thinking about how to develop trees, and just trying to figure out somewhere in the middle, I feel like, is where I want to land,
Yeah, you can't realistically start a business with the Ann Spencer model.
Right. I mean, absolutely beautiful trees. We have a few of her trees in our yard, and they're just shocking to look at how beautiful they are. But you can't develop a business model around doing trees that way.
And for those who don't know, this was a Portland area enthusiast who had just a fantastic collection that developed very slowly over decades. And the people lucky enough to have some of those trees appreciate them for the character that you can really only build into a tree over many increments over long periods of time.
Right. And kept in small pots, and kept, very, very meticulous record keeping on what everything was done. And yeah, beautiful trees, absolutely beautiful trees. But you'd have to have hundreds of acres of little trees like that to be able to manage any kind of like profitability over time,
Well, one of the things you said actually really sticks out to me, and it's kind of it's almost a more helpful way of looking at way I've thought of it growing for a long time. Is, you said, in spring, I'm setting up for fall, and in fall, I'm setting myself up for spring. And I think it's so much easier to explain to people, or to determine for yourself, what is my goal over this next season period, and really focus on that. And then when you get used to taking those individual steps, it might provide the tools you need to start looking further out, more chess game like, and see several moves ahead to where that tree might be.
Right. Yeah. And I think you and I have talked about this. It's, in some ways we sort of have to just shoot in the dark. And then when we, fast forward 5 years, and then when we get there, we realized, okay, this was the path that we should have taken with all of them, but we didn't really know that in the beginning. So we kind of need to have 3 or 4 running tracks at the same time of, okay, we're going to try this way of doing it, or we're going to try this soil and this soil, just kind of like doing some trialing. I think that as a collective, the growing bonsai in America is pretty young, and so we just don't have a whole lot of established norms about, okay, you do it this way. If you're growing black pines, you do it this way, and then you do it that way. And of course, we can lean on the Japanese or other cultures that have been doing this longer than we have, but in some ways we kind of have to do our own because of our different climates or whatever. So yeah, so we kind of have to like play with like, I'm going to do 3 different ways. I'm just going to push them down the track. And in 5 years, I will have known what worked the best. And then hopefully even before the 5 years is over, I can begin to make adjustments to the way I'm doing that so that I'm not arriving at the train station with nothing in my hands,
Yeah, and that's what I call a 5-year lesson. And if only all of the lessons I've learned only took 5 years. But
Right.
I agree, there's not enough time to make all of your lessons parallel. Well, I'm just going to do it this way. And then at the end of 20 years, then I'll try some other way.
Right. Right.
You're just really limiting what you can accomplish unless you've got 10 friends who are each taking 10 different paths. But
Exactly. Yeah. And, there's other people that are doing things, so we can hopefully, be conversing about what other people are doing, what's working for them. But, even you and I have fairly similar, we have fairly similar weather, I think, fairly similar growing conditions, but we're even different. I think we get more rain than you do. You get less cold than we do. So, even as much as we can be talking about stuff, we're also kind of talking about totally different areas of the country, totally different, growing conditions. So
yeah, it's true. Within a 1-day drive, I could probably have just completely radically different weather patterns.
oh yeah, it's crazy. Exactly.
Just knowing that at the end of a day, I could either be at your house or in Mexico or, up at 9,000 feet in the Sierra Nevada, let alone Death Valley.
Right.
There's
Death
just a
Valley.
lot of
Exactly.
that's too big a continuum right there.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I like that idea. I'm going to think about that, maybe write more about how to identify what that next goal is or what that next step is and do it. What I've often said is it's so great when you've got a 1-year-old tree, you've got 12 months to figure out how to work on a 2-year-old tree.
Yeah. Right.
It sounds so easy. And honestly, it is, because you literally do have 12 months to figure out what to do with a 2-year-old tree. And there's no year in a tree's life that's any different. If someone gives you a 14-year-old tree, you've got a year to learn what to do with a 15-year-old tree.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it's nice, one of the things I've seen in the yard here, and then I've started some of my own seedlings and cuttings, and it's nice to have, like, okay, you walk out in the backyard and I have a 50-year-old tree and I have a 48-year-old tree and I've got a 46-year-old tree, like the chochibai. It's so nice to have 2 or 3 imported trees that came from Japan, that were grown in Japan, and that are finished trees that if I'm stumped, I can sometimes go out and stare at them and figure it out, And so it's nice, like, to not only have, like, I not only have 12 months to figure out what to do with a 15-year-old tree when it's 14, but I can go out in the yard and I can kind of look at what a 15-year-old tree might look like, and I can learn some lessons, like, okay, when it was 14, I should have done this. So I'm going to take this 14-year-old and I'm going to try different something, or I'm going to do, whatever the deal is. So it's kind of nice to have those different ages. And with my own stock, I'm starting to see that a little bit, because I've got a couple of years now.
Oh, cool.
But it'd be nice as I get into older stuff to be able to kind of reevaluate behind,
It's bonsai's kind of an open book test that way.
Right. Exactly.
I've always thought that one of the many benefits of doing an apprenticeship is that your hands are physically on great trees, and you kind of can't help but take note of, how is this put together? How has this changed over time? And if you're working in a garden that deals with different species and different stages of development, you're going to get a pretty broad experience, and that there's kind of no shortcut to that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's so nice to see, like, we've got a good mix in this yard of propagated trees. Even a lot of the conifers are propagated. And then we've got wild trees right next to it. So we have these 2 shore pines that really look fairly similar. You can tell which one is wild, but one was grown at Telperion and one was grown, it was grown in the wild. So it was collected, and they have similar bends. They have similar tilts. They have similar, obviously the one in the, the one from the wild is a lot older bark and a lot craggier in a way, but like, it's just nice to, like, look at these trees next to each other and be able to make some comparison notes of, like, okay, if my goal is to create something that looks like it came from the wild, it's just so nice to be able to study trees that were grown in the wild,
Yeah, exactly.
And so I'll often be bending up black pines, and I'll pull my stool up next to the pines in the yard, and I'll just stare at the pines, and then kind of like try to imagine what it would what would make that trunk line look like that, if I'm working on it right now, and so it's kind of fun to like be able to walk around and look and think, oh wow, that is really fascinating how nature did that movement, or how this thing happened, just kind of imagine how these movements were created, and then kind of pushing that into my own work as I'm trying to create that stuff myself.
Do you do much studying of books or online for images of things you like in
Yeah, the
trees?
Kokufu, we have the full collection of Kokufu, and I spend a lot of time digging through there. Extremely helpful. I haven't found a whole lot of great online resources. There's a couple of Japanese blogs that I follow, especially for Shohin, that are just kind of eye candy, just fun to look at. And one of them, especially, the person is really good at like the English translation is terrible, so I can't really get anything from that. But just from the photos, you can follow trees over time, so you can look back through the life of this trident maple or whatever it is, and you can kind of see how the development worked and what they did to create what they're working on, and so it's kind of nice to be able to look back through the history and see, because I think that's the most valuable. Is it's fun to look at a final product like the Kokufu book, but I think it's almost more valuable to be able to dig back through the diary and see, like, okay, they grew out this huge branch, and they grew it out solely for the purpose of making it a gin, or they grew it out to give girth to the trunk, or whatever it is, and so seeing that setup again, that sacrifice for what the tree needs the next time around, it's nice to see.
There was an exhibit in Japan where they started putting up those old diary photos up on a wall, and you could actually see the development of trees over, 10, 15, 25 years. And it was really, really neat to see. And then the tree's actually right there. So the punchline is, and here it is.
Oh yeah. Fun. Oh, that's great. Yeah. I mean, I even love looking at that in our own yard. I can go back through Michael's blog and just kind of see when the tree came in and what development has happened between then and now. It's kind of shocking sometimes, like, oh my gosh, it really wasn't all that many years ago that this thing looked like it was on the edge of death. And then here it is. Like, I'm having to cut half of the foliage off because it's growing too wildly now. It's growing too crazy.
Oh, it's so cool.
Yeah, pretty wild.
Well, what are you excited to start in spring? Like what, we get to start a new batch of trees every year. What are you kind of fired up about sending out there?
Yeah, so I'm working on black pines a lot. I've got a grow room going in the garage, and I'm learning from a couple of online people, just kind of hydroponic growing of black pines. And the great thing about it is that I'm growing under grow lights in a grow tent with injecting CO2, just like pot growers do it. And so the turnaround time is a little faster because I'm getting 2 years of growth out of a year of tent time. So I can kind of see what's happening a little bit faster than just growing outside,
Will that be cost effective, you think?
I think so. I'm still trying to figure that out, but I think it will be. And the farm that we're going into has solar. We're going to put in a massive solar array. So I think the electricity it'll be economical, but I've still got to figure that out.
Yeah,
that's one of the things of that's just such a different game than I play here, where it's like, what's my cost benefit analysis? I have to figure out my inputs. I got to figure out and I've got to turn trees around. That's the whole thing with me going forward, is I'm going to have to figure out how to turn trees around. I can't just keep and maintain a beautiful collection. I'm not going to rely on teaching. My goal and income is going to come from selling trees. So I've got to figure out how to do that economically. I've got to figure out how to do that, the economy of motion and all of that, so that's going to be really interesting. So I don't know if the grow room stuff is going to be efficient as far as cost goes, but we'll see.
So on that same track, what have you thought about what your horizon is for how old a tree you want to be releasing? Like, is this a 2-year horizon, a 5-year horizon, a 10-year horizon, or are you thinking over quite a broad range? for the pines, say?
Yeah, I think quite a broad range, especially to begin with, because I mean, I think ideally I'm looking for probably 5 to 7 years is kind of my release them into the wild at that age. But if I think about what the heck I'm going to do for 5 to 7 years while I get my 5 to 7 year trees going, you know, I think it'll probably be a fade in of like the first year is going to be obviously all 1 year trees. And then the second year is going to be mostly 1 year trees and some 2 year trees. And the third year is going to be mostly 3, you know, and then I'm eventually going to, once I have 5-year-old trees, I'm going to eventually fade out because I enjoy starting trees, but I don't think that's where I'm going to end up. You know, that's not where my training is. That was kind of the whole thing with working here is like, I want to learn how to take a 2-year-old tree and turn it into something that Michael would want to work on. You know, I don't necessarily, I mean, I love cutting and propagating. That's I really enjoy doing that. So
nice.
I probably will turn around some really young stuff just because it's hard to find some of that stuff. But for the most part, I don't want to just kick it out into the wild when it's 9 months old and has a little bit of root on it. I want to figure out how to set it up for someone so that it's, you know, it's a puzzle that they can solve, but it's a puzzle that could be solved in a way that makes a really nice plant.
Yeah, and that's something that's lost. I don't know that growers or buyers, and I include myself in both of those categories, have a good sense of what the criteria should be at such early stages of development. All we know is more is better, and that doesn't necessarily serve us really well because more growth typically means bigger internodes. You know, more roots means more stuff that we have to prune away, or that it won't fit in a pot. And so I think it's going to take education on all of our parts to figure out some of those puzzles.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I'm wondering, are you looking to do a lot of deciduous as well?
Yeah, I'm going to have a healthy mix of them. I think, you know, obviously being in the yard for over a year with Andrew has influenced me greatly towards deciduous stuff. So I'm going to definitely do deciduous. But I think it'll probably be 50-50 as far as like actual plants. It'll be probably half and half.
That'd be fantastic. That's a lot of deciduous. Let me know if you figure them out, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, sure. No, Andrew luckily is like 5 years ahead of me on that stuff. So I'll be leaning heavily on him.
Exactly. No, that'll be great. I look forward to seeing all that come together.
He'll have almost a year in the yard before I move out in his new place. It's getting set up this week. And so he'll have almost a year to figure out some stuff that I can hopefully, you know, work on. And then obviously he's been at it a lot longer than I have. So yeah, I think I'll probably find myself in this neighborhood quite often because he and Michael are just a couple blocks away from each other. So I think I'll find myself in this neighborhood a lot, just continuing my education. And I mean, I think we talked a little bit about this, but I kind of, 12 years before I did this, I owned a restaurant and did wood-fired pizza. And I always bristled when people said I was a chef because I wasn't really a chef. You know, that's a term that it's kind of like calling someone a doctor when they don't have a doctorate or whatever, you know, it's like that. That's a term that I reserve for people that deserve that term. And so I would always just say I'm a business owner or I'm a cook or whatever, like call me something other than a chef because a chef has that title that everybody can make assumptions around.
Yeah.
And so I think in that same vein, the apprentice sort of bristles a little bit. I bristle at that because I think about, you know, the apprenticeships that I read stories about, I hear from Michael, the traditional Japanese apprenticeships. I'm not really following that. I don't deserve that title in a way because I'm not really following that same track. And so obviously I'm dedicating some time to this yard. I'm dedicating time to Michael. I'm learning. I mean, in the pure word of an apprentice, I'm apprenticing under Michael, obviously, but it's kind of interesting because I don't think that my life here in this yard looks almost anything like a Japanese apprentice's life in Japan. And obviously I don't really know what that looks like. I haven't experienced that myself either, but just from the stories I've heard, it seems like a much different relationship between Michael and I, especially in this yard versus what people experience in Japan. So.
Well, then we'll call you an intern.
An intern. Okay, I'll take that. I'll take intern.
An internist. Have there been any big surprises for either you or your family, since you started? Is it kind of what you thought it would be, or have there been any, or have you found the focus being totally different than any of you would have guessed?
No, I think we had a good conversations up front with Michael, and I think we came into it having a pretty good idea of what was going on. We were in a weird situation. We own a house across town, and then just with the housing situation here at the yard, I did 3 months of commuting before we moved, and so we kind of were able to fix some of those kinks like before we dove in all the way, I think. And yeah, we just super open communication from the beginning about what the expectations were. And I mean, I think probably if I said I'm learned anything or was shocked by anything is how much these things take to water. Oh my gosh. I mean, in the heat of the summer, because the first summer I was here, it was 3 months of commuting, and Andrew was still in his apprenticeship. So at 5 o'clock, I'm punching out like a union man, getting on my bike and biking home an hour and enjoying my life, and then this summer I'm living here and realizing, oh, we're watering until dark or after dark sometimes, like on these super hot nights. Like we're out there, first thing in the morning before I would have gotten here when I was commuting, and way after I left. And then the weekends aren't really weekends because you got to water 6 times, which takes essentially the whole day. And, these trees need to get done for the client. So we're working into the evening. So it's just these things I didn't really, I was privileged to not be able to have to engage in because Andrew was still an apprentice, and I was just commuting. Yeah. But I think if there was anything that's like, oh, I didn't really get that. Yeah. Okay. Do you have to water the trees all the time? Like all the time.
And it's hard to overstate the disruption of interruptions, and that's every visitor to the garden, that's every class that's taught, that's every supply you need to go buy. It's really surprising how all that adds up. It's like the interruptions are going to happen, the watering is going to happen, fertilizing and spraying is going to happen, and what we think of as bonsai is what happens in the gaps between those things.
Exactly. Yep, exactly. Yeah, COVID has really destroyed all of our lives, and some people more than others, but it's kind of been nice in the yard here because we don't have visitors. And so there's this, pomp and circumstance that doesn't have to happen. And there's not like, I love talking to people. I love talking to people about what we do and entertaining people and engaging with people. But there's just an amount of work that doesn't get done when we do that. And so that work has to be done some other time. So it's sort of been nice to have Michael and Andrew are both around a lot more because they're not traveling as much. And so there's extra hands in the yard, and we don't have visitors. We don't have classes to prepare for in real life. And so, yeah, it's just a kind of a nice difference around here to be able to kind of get some stuff done.
I bet it sounds like it.
Yeah.
Well, what's on your to-do list between now and graduation day? That's not that far out.
Yeah, it's not. I was talking to Michael a couple of days ago. He and I need to just work out a schedule here because there's some things I want to focus on. We didn't get to much air layering this last year. I've done it a little myself, but I want to do a good amount of air layering, deciduous mostly. Just want to try to figure that out because I think that's going to be one of the keys to developing, especially Shohin, is I think really nailing down air layering. I've done a good amount of grafting, and I really love grafting conifers, especially junipers.
Nice.
But I want to just make that a little more systematic. I want to figure out. We did a little bit of different time grafting this year, and so by spring we should see what was the most successful. But I want to do a little bit more of that just to kind of nail down. Andrew and I are both hoping to graft some Yamadori, especially some Rockies, graft them over to Itoagawas. And so I just want to figure out, what is the best grafting style? What is the best grafting tape? What is the best, timing, aftercare, all of these things. Because, I think aftercare is probably one of the things that grafts die in more than even technique, I think, is just aftercare and timing. So really want to nail that down, really be systematic about starting a grafting project every 2 weeks, all through the summer, and just see what really comes out the best. because we had some different successes this year, and I think it probably had to do with that. And so, yeah, just kind of going through that.
Oh, did you do a lot of grafting in summer?
We did, yeah. We do a
Oh,
lot of our
wow.
juniper grafting in summer, and so we actually grafted all the way up to 9 September.
Huh.
So I think we mostly grafted in June, July, but then I grafted all the way up into September. It just kind of like seeing like, okay, what's going to work? What's going to, and if we can obviously scientifically make a hypothesis, the ones in September did nothing. They're just sitting there, they're just waiting till spring. But in the words of our good friend Gary Wood, if it's not dead, it's alive. So we're gonna hope it into next spring.
I know there's kind of a bell-shaped curve for grafting in winter around here, where your odds get better in December, get best maybe at the very end of the year, beginning of January, and then they start dropping off after about a month.
Sure.
So you can graft whenever, but your odds are going to reflect the calendar a little bit.
Right. Yeah, and it's kind of the same with the propagating. I'm going to try to do a lot more propagating at different times of year. Obviously there's some scientific research out there, the propagating books and stuff. But I just want to like really nail down, like, okay, if 95% of the juniper grafts or propagations are going to take, I want to know exactly what it is that creates that, what it is that is going to give me that, because it just doesn't look good to do propagations or air layers if you've got a 60% failure rate or something.
Yeah, and so for things like cuttings, timing can matter unless you've completely controlled your environment, in which case you can propagate all day long. What I found is that in general, you can do most kinds of propagation, well, I should say seed and cutting all year long, but it might not be the most effective times to do it. Like because of when you're starting things and how big a tree is in a certain season, you're not going to get the growth benefit that if you're on a different program. And so I know some years, because I've started seeds in almost every month of the year, and you just find out that, yeah, some of them are way, way smaller after 12 months than they would be had I started at some other time.
Sure. Yeah. And a lot of times, with here, the time we're pruning mature trees doesn't necessarily correlate with the time that we ideally are taking cuttings. And so, it's like, okay, can I make this cutting work? We just cut a beautiful azalea. It's probably not the best time to do cuttings on azaleas, but we only have one in the yard. And so I want to get cuttings off of this thing. And so how do I work to make these cuttings survive? So they're in my grow tent, and just like hope that I can make them go, because we only have one, and I really want cuttings from it, but we cut it this time of year. And so, it's little things like that. Like maybe the goals of the propagating doesn't necessarily line up with the goals of the yard.
Yeah. Though for azalea specifically, if you can provide 85 degrees with 95% humidity, they will all take.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm hoping for. I've got them in the grow tent, and that's about what my conditions are. So
yeah, then I expect they're already growing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's a beautiful little kokonsai that Michael has for. It's an accent on an azo, a little mountain azalea. It's a beautiful little thing, and it's got tiny little leaves, and it probably isn't going to make much of a tree itself, but it's a beautiful like accent. It's got some beautiful little things about it that I really like.
That sounds cool. Have you squirreled away stock plants for taking cuttings?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, Michael is completely gracious to let me have cuttings from here, so I've been just everything that gets cut, I'm sticking. So almost nothing goes into the garbage pile, and so I've been able to do that. And then I also got some trees from Telperion. They were gracious in offering Andrew and I some stock plants from after their tragic disaster. And so I've got some stock plants put away from that. And that's where, I mentioned to them, it's like phoenix rising from the ashes. It's going to be the plants that I am using to do cuttings and stylings and stuff on. I'm not planning on turning those trees around and selling them. I'm going to use them as mother plants, stock
good.
plants.
That's really important. If you can find some trees with good genetics and then get them in the ground or in a huge container, so you have as many cuttings as you want to be able to strike. And
I think that's also, I'm going to continue coming, because like the chochabai, Michael's got a lot, and they cut 3 times a year. We cut 3 times a year here for those, and So I told him, like, if you wouldn't mind me coming and helping during that week long, 3 times a year, I'll come out and cut and take cuttings, just because I don't have the volume of stock plants on those yet. So, I think I'll continue to engage with he and Andrew both about helping out in their yards in order to take materials. And Andrew is a little more, he's buying plants. He's traveling all over getting stuff. He's looking for his own stock and his own supply. And I think I can really piggyback on the work he's doing to try to find, that stock plant and then take cuttings of it. He's got some pomegranates that he just got, and it'd be nice to like build a stock with him, at the same time.
That makes all kinds of sense.
Yeah, exactly. I just say, if you find something nice, buy 2 of them. Like,
buy 10 of them.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, whatever. It's crazy.
Well, that sounds awesome. I'm excited for there to be some more material available in the not too distant future. And it sounds like that's not too far off, since you'll be kicking things off as soon as the middle of next year.
Yeah, I hope so. I probably will take a year, so it'll be, a year and a half from now. But I think that I'm going to start spitting stuff out. That's my hope. And
will there be much build out that you have to do when you first start?
Not a whole lot. A friend of mine he bought some property out of town. It's about halfway between here and the coast, so it's beautiful, right in the coastal mountain range.
Nice.
And it's 45 minutes from Michael's house and 45 minutes to the beach. So we're perfectly situated right on the edge of the mountains. And he's putting in a huge greenhouse and huge infrastructure for a vegetable farm. And I'm just going to beg, borrow, and steal little corners of workshops and greenhouses and that sort of thing for now. And so there's not going to be a whole lot of build out for a while. I'll just kind of organically build it out over time as I have need. So they're putting in a 100-foot greenhouse, and they only need 30 foot of it themselves. So I'm going to take half of it for now.
Nice.
And then as they need more of it, I'll build out another greenhouse for myself. So, they're going to organically grow over the next 4 or 5 years to more acreage. They have 40 acres. Wow. And then I'm just going to kind of do the same thing, grow slowly over that time. So we'll eventually need to put in a couple other greenhouses or low hoops or workshop spaces. But for now, there's plenty of infrastructure on the farm. So
that's great. How long have they been
it'd be kind
of
nice because, they've got, they're doing organic veggie and they're super excited about it. There's going to be 2 couples living out there doing veggies. And so we're obviously going to be growing different things, but there'll be some like symbiotic relationships between the way we're doing things. And, if they need to be gone for the weekend, I can water their starts and vice versa. So hopefully we can have some, some back and forth. That's really good for all of us working out there.
Oh, that's so cool. That sounds really fun.
And maybe one day we'll be able to get all together and have conferences and sales and stuff again. I don't know. So, because I think that's probably the missing piece is I just don't know how I'm going to sell. I'm not in love with the idea of shipping all over the country, but, obviously going to have to do some of that because I can't expect everyone to come here. But at the same time, like, it's just that's one of the business things that's not quite set yet. Like, how much am I going to make this like a niche local thing that I'm going to sort of like ask people to come to, or how much am I going to just advertise on eBay and sell things everywhere and anywhere? That's just kind of like, okay, I got to figure that one out. Obviously in the beginning, I'm probably going to have to sell more widely, but then maybe eventually I can shrink down and kind of expect people to come to me, but.
Yeah, apart from what hobbyists are looking for, I know that pretty much every club, convention, and other bonsai event in the country is looking for workshop material. And it sounds like the stuff you're growing is going to be perfect for workshops. And so I know there's going to be need in pretty much every corner of the country. The big question, like you say, is what are the most effective ways for you to move that stuff, whether you're sending shipments or cars to various parts of the country on different occasions, or whether you're doing that one by one in boxes, that can be TBD.
Right. And, when is that all going to happen again, with COVID and even like, I don't think they even have a conference set up on the West Coast. Even before COVID, I don't think they had plans for something. So, there's just some energy that'll have to be recreated once we all come out of this.
Yeah, I know if you're if you're not afraid to drive over the California border, I know they're still thinking about having a big the normal convention next fall, and then every year they do one in California, and so
Yeah,
pretty good sized event. So, and then Portland has a good sized event, so of course you can always piggyback on Portland. You've got the Pacific Northwest up in Seattle, so a lot of great organizations in your neck of the woods. Fortunately,
right. Yeah, fortunately, definitely, and it's a good growing location. There's a couple of great growing locations in the country, and this is one of them. This is one of them. It's one of the biggest nursery wholesale areas in the country, so it kind of makes sense to be here.
Well, cool. Well, does anything else come to mind that you want to put in our ears before we let you go and get on with the day and go water?
Right. No, it's actually raining. I'm looking out the window right now.
Wow.
It's pouring rain. The sun actually came out. So what do they call that when the sun is shining and it's raining? Anyway, it's doing that right now. So
neat.
And it's 45 degrees. So I don't think anything's going to need a whole lot of attention today. But
oh, that's awesome. So what do you do? What does your apprenticeship do then when you've got a bunch of wet, cold trees outside?
So right now I'm working on, I got a couple of azos, I think, that are probably coming next. I got to get them dried off though. So I made that mistake. See, I should have gone in and dried them in the studio before I talked to you so that they'd be ready to work after. But azo is one that you want to keep wet while you're working on it so it doesn't shed needles. See, this is so crazy. It's like some you want to keep dry so they don't get diseases, but azo is one that you want to keep misting so that you don't lose needles. And so it might be perfect. I'll pull in the wet azo and work on it when I get done here.
Sounds perfect. Sounds like a nice way to spend the afternoon.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, cool. Well, thanks so much for chatting. We'll do it again before too long.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much, Jonas.
Awesome. Thanks, John.
Yeah. The music on today's podcast was brought to you by the fine folks at Blue Dot Sessions. Check them out at www.sessions.com.